Let me just tell you how this works. Can you hear me? If you don't hear me well, grab this one and put it on your ear. Okay. Do you hear me through this one? Hello? 1, 2, 3, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
You can't control the volume.
Okay. It's supposed to work. It always works when we're here. We somehow seem to have a problem.
Just go ahead.
So, I have a big voice, so I just want to welcome you all. I'm Hans Hallenbeck. I'm part of the Interfaith Partnership Program. Sharon Ballon, who's sitting next to me, and I are the NGO representatives for the International Prison Chaplains Association and for the Cure International Program. We welcome you to these sacred halls of the United Nations. We welcome delegates from 6 different nations. We welcome 12 expert presenters from different sections of the correctional system. We welcome back returned citizens who are among us. Would anyone want to raise their hand? Returned citizen? You're welcome. Thank you for being here. And we welcome the audience of good people who have gathered here today. We are all people with concern for justice and dignified treatment of people incarcerated in this country and around the globe. We welcome you to a dialogue on the intersection on poverty and prison. We welcome and express a deep gratitude to our 10 distinguished co-hosting organizations. And when I mention your name, if representative is here, please raise your hand so we can recognize you. The Carmelite Prison Interest Organization of Nigeria. Yes. John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Maryknoll Office of Global Concerns. New York State Council of Churches. Parliament of World Religions. Presbyterian Church USA. The Altogether in Dignity Fourth World Movement. The Unitarian Universalist Association. The World Council of Churches. And United Religions Initiative. I think you get a sense that we are among good people hosted by good companies. My hope and my prayer is that this meeting may bring hope to people incarcerated around the world, 10 million people imprisoned worldwide. I now give the floor to Reverend Bruce Knotts, who is a seasoned diplomat, and we are very welcome to have him with us as our moderator. He is the director of the United Universalists office here at the UN. Thank you, Bruce, for being with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the ordination that I really don't deserve. I call myself an ordained diplomat, not ordained clergy. But I do represent the Unitarian Universalist Association at the United Nations, and I'm also a trustee on the Parliament of the World's Religions. And I'll just interject one thought before I introduce our next speaker. And it's not original with me. I've heard it from elsewhere. I think it matters what kind of deity, what kind of God we worship. If we worship a loving and redemptive God, we might become loving and redemptive people ourselves and might devise a loving and redemptive criminal justice system. So just a thought. We're very grateful to the Permanent Mission of Denmark to the United Nations for their sponsorship and for helping us organize this event. We have with us today Kit Clausen, who is a counselor for economic and social affairs from the Permanent Mission of Denmark. Please welcome her.
Thank you. I'm really here on behalf of my colleague Julie, who was very sorry that she couldn't make it. I look very much forward to listening to your deliberations. It's good to see so many good people here, and all my best hopes for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, now what we're going to do now is something like speed dating. So everybody has 4 minutes or less to speak, and I think we're going to speak, yes, believe it or not. Elaine Lord, Superintendent of the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. It's a maximum security prison for women in Bedford Hills, New York. And you are, yes, take it away.
Hello. I am very thrilled to be here. Hans mentioned one fact, and I guess I want to just mention one more. We all know the numbers and things. But the U.S. has 1/3 of the females in prison worldwide. We don't represent 1/3 of the female population of the world. Far from it. So something is very wrong right from the get-go. The only other clarifying point I want to make is I retired as superintendent, by the way, so I don't do it anymore, but I am an advocate, I hope, for change. I don't believe there are any good prisons, and that includes the one that I ran. If we really wanted to talk seriously, we'd talk about how to get rid of them, not how to make them more humane, although they can be more humane, and I guess that's what I shot for, how to make it more humane, how to include the inmates or the offenders that are in them in the process of their own change, in the process of knowing that change was needed and that they had choices that they could make, and giving them a platform to make some of those choices. I don't think compassion is coddling, but I used to run into that all the time. I think compassion is like love. It's like something that we should strive for, and it could come from the churches so much more strongly and have such a big impact. And I say that even from my own history, because it was the churches that really helped in developing the programs that we had at Bedford, that gave me the community support to do the things we did at Bedford. We all know that most people go to prison, and women in particular, with horrendous records of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, childhood abuse, usually serially, all of them combined. It makes it a tough starting point, but it makes it understandable how they got there. People don't start out life and say, gee, I want to go to prison. But when we put them in prison, we separate them from society. We really do create them as the other. And very, very seldom do we give them, we almost don't want to give them chances to become part of the society again. After all, we want to make sure those walls are high enough, the fences are strong enough so that they are separate. I think choice is a learned skill. And that's something that we can do in prison to a certain extent. Now, I was lucky. I ran a prison that had less than 1,000. And believe me, in the U.S., many of the prisons are much bigger than that. And it would be really, really hard to do what I did. So there are no good prisons. And I think when you talk about poverty, women in this country, in the U.S., are poorer than men. And when you add race into that, it's significantly more. So we know who goes to prison, and we ought to damn well know why they go to prison, because there aren't many opportunities for them. At Bedford, we created a parenting center, a children's center with host families that took these kids in the summer, and they often came from the churches. The churches were the bedrock to help all of that happen. We worked with the women. Women were very, very sad because the college programs had gone away in the United States because they had been defunded federally. And we worked with the women and a group of community people, church people, to bring college back. And we were the first prison in the country to bring college back. And it made an enormous... It wasn't my It was a group effort. And I think that's what I'm saying. We have to, if we're going to talk about prisons, we have to open those gates. We have to make it more transparent. I hate what is happening. We are making it more and more so that nobody knows what goes on in prison. And that's the opposite of what we should be doing. And it's the opposite of what the people in prison should be feeling.
Thank you. Yeah, when you hear the church bells, that's the end of the time. So. Our next speaker is Stefan Loboglio. I hope I'm getting that right.
You got it right.
Okay.
Right here.
Hi. Did I say that anywhere near correct?
Good.
All right, close. All right. Principal Justice Initiatives. Welcome.
Welcome home. Welcome home. That was the name given to a daring and innovative program that mentored individuals being released from prison and returning to Washington, D.C. Organized by two visionary priests, the goal of Welcome Home was to match carefully selected men and women to work with the incarcerated individuals and assist their coming home. The volunteers came from every walks of life, from different faith traditions. We had homemakers, business people. One I remember was a helicopter pilot from the Air Force, another a CIA specialist. 201, they were dedicated to assisting their fellow returning citizens come back home. Their fellow returning citizens weren't at first necessarily that interested in their help. They didn't know what being mentored meant. They didn't necessarily relish the prospect of somebody else looking over their shoulders. At the time in Maryland, I was running a correctional facility, and I was able to see, though, up close how that faded quickly. And soon the individuals were able to make use of mentors to assist them with employment, with housing, helping them make amends with victims and with family members. Why was the program so successful? One individual said to me, yes, there was practical stuff of their help with employment, jobs, and housing, but it was the fact that they treated us with dignity, and they helped us recover our humanity. Welcome home. We also heard these words ring last week from the State of the Union, when the President acknowledged two returning prisoners who were in the gallery as guests of the House chamber. Members of both parties erupted in a standing ovation. They were also applauding a landmark piece of legislation called First Step that's bringing vital sentencing reform and reentry resources to our field. Two previous presidents also helped with this welcoming attitude. President Obama was the first president to visit a federal prison in the United States. In his administration, hundreds of millions of dollars flowed to support reentry programs. And indeed, it was President Bush, the president before him, who signed the law that allowed this funding to come through. How far we have come from demonizing and dehumanizing individuals who are incarcerated. From the 90s, when we were fear-mongering and using labels like super predators and incorrigibles. Indeed, in the 2 decades in the millennium, we are seeing a remarkable bipartisan coalition from the left and the right, from all faith traditions, pulling in unison and bending that arc of the moral universe towards justice. And we are seeing signs of success. We are seeing juvenile detention in this country halved in the last 10 years. We're seeing adult incarceration rates falling while crime remains low. We're seeing improved conditions of confinement through accreditation and standards and ridding our prisons of sexual violence. We're seeing more businesses willing to hire the incarcerated. We're electing governors, county executives, mayors, and even prosecutors who are increasingly supporting reentry programs and who are demanding greater justice. We are honoring and respecting the rights of victims, and we also have learned what works through research and demonstration projects to help these individuals. When I began my correctional career, the mantra was clear: care, custody, and control. That was it. All the correctional administrators in this country now recognize that corrections has a role to prepare individuals for release. So we add to care, control, and community. We know that incarceration rates are too high. Still too many barriers exist. We have many steps in front of us, but the first ones have been taken to welcome home our returning citizens.
Our next speaker is Reverend Stanley Chamisia. Am I saying that anywhere near right? And he is a prison chaplain from Malawi. He rides a bike 50 miles to visit inmates in prison, and he'd like to get a car, if anybody would like to get him a car. Welcome.
Indeed, I'm Reverend Stanley Chimesia from Malawi, Africa. In Malawi, prison ministry or prison work is going on very well, especially the role of the church. We as a church, we are trying our best to make the prisons to be a suitable place. But unfortunately, in our prisons conditions, all over, they are very pathetic. When we talk about rehabilitation, it is very difficult to implement rehabilitation of inmates. How could we rehabilitate an inmate who is having a single meal in a day? How do we implement rehabilitation when an inmate is sleeping on a bare floor without a blanket? How do we implement rehabilitation when an inmate in a prison cell has no any food? He eats only a single meal a day, no soap. So many challenges. But as a church, we are trying our best. And I mobilize well-wishers from different denominations to support and to bring soap and other basic materials into our prisons. We also ask churches to go and visit the inmates by giving them various donations. A Bible is an essential tool in our cells. As part of spiritual rehabilitation, I introduced in all prisons prayers in all prison cells. Each morning and every evening, before they sleep and before they come out of the prison cell, they have to do a Bible study. Even a Muslim, they do Bible study with Christians. They pray together, discuss a Bible chapter. Each Tuesday, all prisons, they gather together at one place and do Bible studies. So I go by each and every prison conducting prison Bible studies. Another thing, to implement the pastoral work in our prisons, I tried to convince the prison department in our country to have one officer in charge to be in charge of chaplaincy department, whom works with me and other people. But still, there are some other challenges because torture is ongoing in our prisons. Again, on the re-entry program, we have introduced this program through the Prison Fellowship in Malawi. We have collaborated with the Prison Fellowship in Malawi, whereby those who have just released from prisons, they are being sent to Prison Fellowship in Malawi, where Blantyre Synod, where I'm coming from, is working together with this organization, and they're being trained and helped in skills of building, electrical installation, welding and fabrication, tailoring, and other things. But the challenge is we do not get materials, kits, toolkits to give these people after 6 months of their training. We do this in order to make them not commit any crime because of poverty crime level in Malawi. For your information, Malawi is the third poorest country in the whole world. So most of the crimes are being committed because people are poor and they are not, they're jobless. So it's a big challenge. The effects and the good work that we're doing is producing lots of work in the society. Some of the ex-inmates, as I'm speaking today, they're at theological college doing theological training to become what we call abusers, reverend. Some are church elders. Some are women guilds. Because we have helped them whilst they were in prisons. We don't condemn them. I don't condemn them. I show them the love of Christ that though we are here, but it's a place where we have to be rehabilitated, both physically and spiritually. So the work in our prisons is going on very well despite challenges that they're facing. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Jill Schaefer. She's a professor of ethics at New York Theological Seminary. Welcome.
Thank you. I teach in the Masters of Professional Studies program at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And I've been doing it now, it's going on my 16th year. And I have to say, every year is the first year. The genius of this program is that it is private. It is privately funded. It is totally under the authority of New York Theological Seminary. The professors approved by the board deal with curriculum and approve the faculty. We are technically the guests of the prison, and they are our hosts. But so far, after 37 years, we seem to gain the hospitality we need to do the work we do. Recently, we've become accredited by the Association of Theological Schools, and so now our students have to work a little harder. They always work hard. They never don't work hard. Now they have to work harder in order to make the grade to be able to be the graduates of an accredited program. But what I wanted to talk about now is the association of poverty and class with race. Because what we are developing, and I don't know how exactly we're going to solve it, is not so much a class system, but a caste system. Inmates are untouchables. And how they are to be restored to their own dignity, regardless of what society thinks of them. There's this rhetoric of rehabilitation that has absolutely nothing to do with self-respect. And so what we try to do is eliminate the rhetoric through our programs and get them to see themselves both as souls and minds in their own right and go for it, and we go for it too. We are trying different techniques or to rekindle the idea that a person is made in the image of God, and it doesn't matter what you've done or what you're going to do, you're still made in that image, and so there is hope, period. What we are doing, and I think we're doing it naturally, is getting away from the push-pull mechanistic approach of lecture response. The kind of, if we say what you should learn, then you repeat it back to us, and then you get an A. We don't do that anymore, or at least we're getting away from it. More and more, we're getting into group work. We're teaching the men to teach themselves. We're teaching the men to create a brotherhood, a community, a countercultural community in the prison, so that they determine how they are going to work with their professors, not so much in criteria, but how they're going to meet that criteria. This allows them to focus on the tasks that we have established for them instead of upon the teacher. The teacher is an authority who facilitates their authority. The teacher is an authority who facilitates their trust in one another. And so more and more there are group projects. For instance, this year, I teach ethics and church history. This year, 2 students are going to take on the city of Venice as their project. They're going to have to talk about Venice from the 11th century to the 16th century in thought, word, and deed. Everything that has to do with the city of Venice in respect to the Christian movement there. I think I said the most important thing. I can stop now.
I have been remiss in only mentioning the host of our organization. I would like at this point to have a chance for you to meet our 2 host organizations, the International Prison Chaplains Association and the Citizen United for Rehabilitation of Errands. And we have with us today Jean-Didier Mbuya, the Vice President of the Prison Chaplains, and Charles Sullivan, who's the President of Cure International. And Jean-Didier, a brief comment from you first. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. The International Prison Chaplains Association and Citizen United for Rehabilitation of Errant, we are working together since 4 years now. Okay. Yeah, and we do have, this is our third side event, and we do plan to have one in Kyoto next year about human rights. So as we are going, you can see there is a problem about human rights. And as prison chaplains, we are planning to have a side event about human rights. And we need your support and input. So if you have any idea about that, so come to us through us, either, and we can try to organize and to plan where to have this event next year in Kyoto.
Good, good. I don't think, I used to street preach in Alabama.
Turn it on anyway.
Let me just say very quickly that there are a lot of people here who came to the conference in Rwanda. That was last May. And so we welcome especially. And so I guess what I've been doing is thinking about not only this wonderful conference that Hans and Sharon have been doing now, this is the third one, gets better every time. And we're trying to get other countries to co-sponsor. We even have somebody who came to Thailand and Geneva at one of our conferences, is now a senator in Canada, and who was very involved in women prisoners. And she was hoping to be here. So we're gradually moving and expanding out. We hope to expand too. In 2020, in April, we're going to be in Kyoto. It is every 5 years the United Nations has a conference concerning criminal justice reform. It goes back to 1955 when the POWs from World War II came together and developed minimum standards for incarceration. These have become the
Nelson Mandela rules.
The Mandela rules. They've been revised. And so we're going to have every 5 years this is, and so this is the one in 2020 that will be in Japan. So those that want to join us, please come and see me, or Hans will take and forward it. Sure. And then the final thing is, I feel, and I've talked to a few of the people here, maybe all of them, that are from Africa that are here, and I've talked to the Carmelites about having, what I think we need is a conference of prison reformers in Africa to come together, and the Carmelites have generously and prayerfully suggested that, I mean, they have decided, I think, at least initially, to host it. It would be in Nigeria. So I think that is something that we really need, and we need each continent to do this, and certainly Africa. We've got a lot of people in Africa that are trying on their own, but they need support. They need to come together to find out. And we have one strong chapter in Nigeria, Sylvester Uher, who has been doing it now for quite a few years. And at that, it didn't go off.
Yeah, it's okay.
You were about ready to get it. I wasn't even timing you.
You keep time.
I figured a street preacher from Alabama was going to go on forever there, so I'm about ready to give you the bell. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll all meet in Kyoto. How about that? That's right. So our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Ulrika Fritzson, prison chaplain from Sweden. Thank you.
A human being died that night. On the night of the murder, a 14-year-old girl died from being suffocated by a pillow. That sentence, "a human being died that night," has a tragic but important double meaning, because the humanness also died that night in the man who killed the girl. I call him Martin in my dissertation, and right now he is serving a life sentence in South Africa. He could also have been Benny or Jörgen at Kumla Maximum Security Prison in Sweden, who also is serving life for murder. These men have all gone through a restorative justice program that highlights the need for healing what is strictly speaking not possible to heal because of its irreparability. The essence of the program therefore lies in the art of narration, of telling the stories, of sharing the painful experiences, and revealing the detestable in a safe enough environment where the stories can be told, listened to, and acknowledged. The genius thing about this program, I would say, and I both prove it in my dissertation and during all of those restorative weeks that are now implemented both in South Africa and in Sweden, is that by drawing the perpetrator into acknowledgement and responsibility, and the victim in a safe enough environment so that the pain can be put into words, it creates rehumanizing experiences. Regarding the perpetrator, you can say that the accountability creates a capacity where the humanness in the perpetrator slowly is growing by the help of responsibility. When being asked to give an account of myself, preferably in the face of the victim, I'm giving the traumatic, accusing narrative, the accusation that draws me into subjectivity and helps me become a human being again. When Martin, after 14 years, meet the parents of the girl he murdered, the mother had just one wish, to tell him to go and rot in hell. And after 3 extremely challenging hours, he concludes with a relieving sigh, "At least I could tell them how I killed her. I will never be able to bring her back to them, but at least I could give them the answer they so desperately needed. I could help them away with the horrific unawareness that kept them awake all these nights. At least I could tell them how I killed her" is a sentence that sums up the ability and capacity that helped Martin to get into touch with his humanness again. And from the victim's perspective, we must keep in mind that time never heals a trauma. Time just preserves it. Trauma is like a living memory, and as those parents exemplified, the trauma must be addressed, and the accusation and questions must be put into the correct direction towards the one who committed the violation. In this way, it is a paradox to say that the perpetrator becomes the one who can assist the victims. No amount of words can undo the past wrongs. Crime always creates irreparable experiences of trauma and guilt that the punitive system does not recognize. The problem is that when the punitive system is the only system that addresses this harm, we get traumatized people. Therefore, as a society, it's our challenge and responsibility to implement and offer reconciliation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Ronald Day, Vice President of Programs of the Fortune Society. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since we've been referring to people by titles, I like to be referred to by Dr. Ronald Day, since I am a PhD like others in here. And I'd say that because I started my educational odyssey in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And in the 11 years that I've been home, 10 of those years I had to finish a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD. So I think that doctor should be before my title like everybody else. So I work for the Fortune Society. Fortune Society has been around for 52 years, offering services to people that have been directly impacted. Our services are pretty eclectic. So we offer mental health, we offer alternatives to incarceration, education, employment, creative arts, you name it, the Fortune Society offers it. Very different than some other organizations. And you think about organizations not just in New York City, but around the country. But beyond that, what we're really proud of at the Fortune Society is that we don't just offer services, because we don't believe that you can service your way out of the conundrum that we find ourselves in. It's the policies that got us into this situation, and it's changing those policies that are going to get us out of it. So we also do advocacy, and we do policy work. All right, we have a lawsuit against Target that we recently won. See it in New York in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. We're suing a landlord who has a blanket policy of discriminating against people around housing. 1/3 of the people that work at the Fortune Society, no, 1/2 actually of the people that work at the Fortune Society are themselves formerly incarcerated. When I was on Rikers, there were 22,000 people there. There are under 8,000 there now. When I was upstate, there was 71,000. They're under about 52,000 there now. That has to do with the work of the Fortune Society and the work of other people in this room. So that is what we need to continue doing. I invite you to come to our housing program at the Castle in West Harlem. The invitation is open. I'd be more than happy to show you this model that's, again, it's not just regional, it's recognized internationally as a housing model. And in addition to that, I would just say the policy that you all are involved in is really integral to the work. All right, so services, again, very, very important, but we have to continue beating the drum. The last thing I say is that there are no inmates in jail. There are no prisoners in jail. There are only people. So we could shift the language that how we refer to people, because this is really about humanization. And we know that prisons are really dehumanizing. One fundamental way that we could change that particular paradigm is to first start by referring to people as people. Thank you.
My apologies, Dr. Day, for not getting your title right. I'm going to throw Sharon under the bus because she didn't put your title on here. I
spent hours researching every person.
And Sharon can throw me under the bus because I wrote down.
We got a lot of people under the bus here. We're all in real big trouble here. Anyway, so our next speaker is Cheryl Wilkins. Is there a title to go with that I should be aware of? MSW, okay, very good. Senior Director, Education and Programs, Columbia University Center for Justice. Please welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm deeply honored. You know, had I been introduced in 1997, I probably would have been identified as 97G1003. And, you know, it's when you hear stories like mine that title gets put forth, and it usually starts at points of arrest. But today I want to start at root causes and entry points that may have led to a woman like me going to prison in the first place. I grew up in poverty in the South Bronx. I can recall as a kid, I was wondering why then President Carter was walking in my playground. Well, the playground was a vacant lot behind abandoned burnt buildings, and that's where kids like me played at. You know, and then I can remember also that this started to become a campaign trail for upcoming presidents. Reagan came after that with promises of making things better. Jesse Jackson stayed in a public housing project, and so forth and so on. But nothing was really changed. And so there was a lot of despair in my community and folks, and there was also a lot of drugs. Drugs were prominent, and it was two things that you did with drugs. You sold them or you used them to really just either change your economic system or escape the despair that you were under. And so I fell into that, and so as many others, and I wound up in prison. And within that prison time, you know, I would want to say that what should have been the darkest time in my life wound up saving my life. And it was women like Elaine Lord that assisted in that life-changing moment for me, because it wasn't normal for folks to really work on themselves and become leaders. It wasn't normal for folks to have an opportunity to look deep inside and look at the root causes that brought you to prison in the first place. It wasn't normal to actually learn that, hey, you're not alone, because after I started doing a research project, Changing Minds, I learned that my situation sounded like somebody in Rochester and in Buffalo, and I was thinking that it was only in the South Bronx. So then I started to connect the dots that this is a systemic system that is oppressing black people and poor people. And that's when my advocacy fire got lit. And I knew that's when I had a purpose in my life. Before that, I was just walking around aimlessly. And so my purpose was to provide educational pathways for those that have been historically excluded. And after I got out and knew that I had the ability to work within an institution, including doing organizing and advocacy work from inside, why not go to another institution, one of the finest in the land? So I went to Columbia. That didn't scare me after working within the prison system. And so my colleague and I, both of us was in prison, and we were a part of bringing that college program back to prison, and it's up and running 20 years later. We wanted to mobilize all of Columbia to care more about the issues that affect black and brown people that were down the block from their institution. And so what we learned was that folks were doing work on criminal justice reform, but they were doing it in silos. And so we went about bringing that together. And so that if we work together, then we felt like we can make major change. And we've been there 10 years now, doing amazing work, providing opportunities for folks who have PhDs like Ronald's to come in and teach. Not formerly incarcerated folks who have PhDs, no, people who have PhDs that may have happened to have criminal justice involvement, overqualified to do positions in Columbia. And so, yeah, okay, I could stop there, but I'm doing much more work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Fred Patrick, and I don't have any titles for Fred either. Fred is the Director, Center for Sentencing and Corrections, the Vera Institute. Welcome.
It's an honor to be here and thrilled to be here. So I want to use my 420 seconds to talk about how do you operationalize human dignity. A lot of folks talk about the need for human dignity as a value in our prison systems, but we at the Vera Institute of Justice have said, how do we take the next step and operationalize that? What does that mean? Since some people see it as this amorphous precept, and others have said you know it when you see it. So we decided to put forth via our Reimagining Prison publication, which I encourage you all to read when you have an opportunity, 3 practice principles for how you would organize a system from top to bottom that's steeped in human dignity, both philosophically and operationally. Practice principle 1, and you've heard this theme here today already, is that you would respect the intrinsic worth of every human being. So according to that principle, you would prohibit the practice of demeaning or degrading anyone. You would, for instance, call individuals by their names, not by numbers. You would instruct staff to ensure that high-quality health care is provided. You would ensure that individuals who are incarcerated are able to select their own clothes. You would provide adequate food and hygiene products. You would serve sufficient amounts of edible and healthy foods. So that is all about how do you operationalize the notion of human dignity in prison. Practice principle 2 is that you elevate and support personal relationships. We all know that many people sort of find their self-worth and their sense of dignity via their relationship with others, families, friends, colleagues. And so by focusing on people who are living in prison and allowing them to develop and maintain positive relationships, you go a long way towards having a system steeped in human dignity. For instance, that would be that you ensure that through architectural design that you don't have unbearable noises, that you're able to provide outdoor recreational spaces, that you have day rooms for group activities, and that you ensure that you have personal and positive interactions between staff and incarcerated individuals. And certainly the relationships have to go beyond the prison walls. Ideally, you want facilities located near the communities that people emanate from. And you also want to ensure that you have high-quality ways of ensuring in-person visits, email visitation, phone visits between individuals incarcerated and their loved ones. The third practice principle is that you respect a person's capacity to grow and change. And that is you have meaningful and high-quality programs and services, particularly around education, skills trainings at all levels, so not just high school diploma and its equivalency, but post-secondary, bachelor's, master's, doctoral degree programs, and that you work with individuals to create employment plans, case plans, family reunification plans, so that individuals are prepared to walk the journey and do the things that they need to firmly and strongly connect with family and community when they return. So my call at the end of the day is that we move beyond the familiar and the incremental, that we realize that the notion of implementing human dignity as a foundational principle can start today. Thank you.
Under 4 minutes. Thank you so much. I'm inspired, and you came in under time, too. That's great. Christina Diaz, you're here. Okay. Christina Diaz is from the International Movement of All Together in Dignity, Fourth World, France. Welcome.
Thank you. I want to make the relationship in between poverty and incarceration. And to do that, I am going to start quoting two great people. The first one has already been mentioned here, is Mandela, who equated poverty to apartheid. And the second one is Johan Galtung, is one of the founding fathers of studies about peace. And he calls extreme poverty a silent genocide. And he doesn't use his words lightly. For this to happen, we need to dehumanize people living in extreme poverty. Like apartheid and other regimes, they humanize people of color, Jews, Tutsis, Rohingyas, indigenous peoples. And in a world that values money, wealth, and education over everything else, we have created the perfect conditions for those who have almost none to become pariahs, outcasts. And this is a very universal phenomenon. It happens in all countries and it happens in all cultures. And it has been happening for a very long time. Mandela, in the speech where he equated poverty to apartheid, thanked the people of the UK, he was in Trafalgar Square, because of their solidarity and support on the fighting against apartheid. But who supports people in poverty, incarcerated because they were labeled as criminals? Who of these people will be released from prison as heroes? When talking about poverty, people say that they are called lazy, scumbags, and those are words that I have heard from people in poverty. Pigs, good for nothing, irresponsible, dishonest, undeserving, even violent and criminal. Violent and criminal. So, because we label them that is how we have become to penalize and criminalize people living in poverty. We penalize and criminalize the way they use public space, the way they earn a living, the way they dress, they are. And this is well documented. Even here at the UN, you can read Magdalena Sepúlveda report on the penalization of people living in extreme poverty, or Philip Alston report on access to civil and political rights for people living in poverty. And I want to end with one example. Bail. So the release of a person pending trial that is subject to a cash deposit or a bond, or subject to conditions like connections to the community, fixed address, permanent employment. Not having that is the definition of poverty. And so we have written in our regulations that if you are poor, you are not going to be released. If we had written in regulation that release pending trial depends on the tone of your skin, we will be outraged. We know the practices, they still do it, but it's not written in law. But it is written, and we still do nothing. I am here horrified saying this, and I know that the bell will ring, and I will pass the floor to the next speaker, and life will continue, and we will continue saying to people living in poverty, we won't release you because you are poor, and we won't feel ashamed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you got in before the bell rang. Thank you. Very inspiring. Melvin McRae? Okay. Do you have a title that I should be aware of? Okay, professor. And digital media programming, the Fortune Society. Welcome.
Yes. So I came to these issues as a broadcast journalist. I worked for ABC News for 28 years and taught at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism for 12 years. And I looked 3 blocks away in the Harlem community, and there were this whole population of mostly black and Latinos who were not getting these storytelling skills, these digital media skills that I was teaching to graduate students at Columbia. So I started a program, the Digital Media Training Program, with funding from Columbia through the West Harlem Development Corporation through a community benefits agreement. And the idea was to train young people to tell their own stories and give them the skills and the agency to create tales that, in other words, people didn't come into their communities telling their stories, they got to tell them themselves. Then, so we got some early success. We won the White House Student Film Festival 3 years in a row, and we got a chance to go to the White House twice. We created a book called From Harlem to the White House, and the 4 folks immediately surrounding the president are from my group, and that young lady, the black woman standing next to Obama, says, "I touched the president." And I said, "Well, why did you touch the president?" She says, "I wanted to see if he was real." So there is a huge disconnect, and people living in Harlem, in the Grant Housing Projects, going to the White House, it's almost surreal for them. But it's very important that we do expose them. So then I got the idea that, okay, we have a successful program, we're making some inroads. What about this population of disconnected youth? I wanted to see if the program would work with them. So we contacted the Fortune Society, my friend David Rothenberg, and he introduced me to Stanley Richards, and we started a program in their Alternative to Incarceration program. I don't know if you know much about that, but people who do low-level offenses are given an opportunity to spend 18 months, 12 to 18 months in a program where they're going to go anger management, counseling, job training, and their charges are dropped. So I came into that program with my storytelling idea. And the 2 things that I wanted to instill was tell your own story and look at the world through the eyes of a journalist. That way you're able to analyze the world around you. And so we taught them how to do research. We put them in front of a computer to explain to them how to do research. We brought in experts like Chike here to talk about business and other issues. We also gave them digital cameras. And one success story is this young man with the microphone, Christopher Padmore. We actually had them go out on the street and do man-on-the-street interviews, which was a big confront for them. He said, "You mean I have to go up and talk to strangers? Oh, my God." But we told them the process to do that. And he actually was invited to come to this forum last year, and he actually asked a question last year, and there he is in the back of the room, scared to death, but he raised his hand because I told him, I said, "Listen, you have to represent your generation, represent the youth. These people in the room are old enough to be your fathers, your grandfathers, and your great-grandparents as well. So you need to represent your people." And so he actually got up and asked a question, and you quite kindly asked him to come to the podium. And so he came to the podium, he asked his question, and I gotta tell you, you showed him so much love and respect. And at the end of the day, that's what people are looking for. They want to be acknowledged, they want to be respected, and they want to be loved. So his story was actually told on broadcast on Channel 13. So we've had some wonderful partners. They're able to disseminate the word. And so I guess the takeaway is that we need to allow people to tell their own stories. We need partners like Channel 13. We need funders like the Trinity Church, who funded this along with Collegiate Churches of New York. We need the schools. We need everyone to pitch in and help our young people tell their own stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I remember that last year, and it was a great question. Wonderful work. Thank you. So the next 2 speakers are together, so you're going to be introduced together. And if I'm really nice, I might actually give you 8 minutes since there's 2 of you, so we'll use them wisely. So, Dr. I'm joking. I hope people don't take me too seriously here. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. Dr. Robert McCree
It's fine.
And okay, that sounds like a miss to me. and Dr. Zach Lee, Dr. McCree is a professor of security management at Department of Law, Political Science, and Criminal Justice Administration at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And Dr. Lee is an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Texas. Is that Austin or where?
Not Austin, but Arlington.
Arlington, okay. Welcome to both of you.
I'd like to take a precious minute to thank Hans Hollenbeck and Sharon Griest Ballen, our moderator Notz, and the Danish Ministry for making this possible, and all of you with your enthusiasm here today. Well, I'd like to ask a question. How would it be if a prison were managed by a church group, not a transitional program, but a prison for medium to high-level security prisoners, those who have committed murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary. 5 years ago, I was in Korea and teaching, and I learned about a prison that was started by a church group and decided to learn more. It wasn't very old. It only started in 2011, excuse me. But, and to determine whether it's successful or not requires a few years of time. So I visited it 3 times with my colleague, and we've come to some conclusions that we'll announce in just a minute for the first time anywhere. Because if a church group manages a prison, they might do it worse than the public state, the same as or better. What happened was the government, the Assembly of Korea, decided that they needed a new prison, and they wanted to save money, and they were looking at the United States of America at a model of private prisons, and thought maybe we should have a private one to compare. So they created what's called an RFP, request for proposal, and there were 7 responses to it. One was the Corrections Corp of America. Another one now called Core Civic. Another one was Wackenhut Corrections, now called GEO. A third one was the largest security company in Japan, Seacom. A fourth was a private business in Seoul, Korea. And then there were, surprisingly, a Buddhist, a Catholic, and a Protestant group that responded to the RFP. The Protestant group, called the Agape Foundation, won it. And they have operated this prison, remarkably called Somang, meaning hope, since that period of time. They raised over $50 million, purchased the land, hired the architect, trained the correctional personnel, brought in volunteers, and all the time were evaluated by the Department of Corrections and the Ministry of Justice. Did it matter? My colleague, Professor Lee, will tell you what we found out.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a great honor to be here and to share the story from South Korea, not the North Korea. Well, according to a South Korean government report, the recidivism rate or reoffending rate over 10 years is about 25%, which is still lower than the United States, which is about the 67% in the United States, going back to the prison within the 3 years after being released. So a 25% on average was decent number, good number. However, as Dr. McCree mentioned, there was one church-based private prison, there's only one in South Korea. It opened in 2010. So this year is a 9th year to operate these church-based private prisons. And both of us, we visited several times, and our interest is about the reoffending, the recidivism rates of the inmate who released from this Somang, means hope prisons, as compared to the other, the general population in South Korea and other countries too. I have a table here too, and I have a couple of copies. Those interest, I can share it. According to this one, once again, the national average is 25%, but reoffending rate from release from this Somang institution is the less than 10%, which is quite a remarkable story, and much lower than the national average, and much lower than the U.S. and then the other countries too. And there are a lot of things to share about it, but this is a church-based private prison, and a lot of programs are somehow based upon the Christianity teachings or their programs too, such as Bible studies and one-on-one counseling. Of course, other religious practices available according to inmate, the religious background or their belief too. But one of the core factors for this successful story is the volunteers. So pretty much every day, over 250 volunteers from diverse background, they visit prisons and they spend time with inmates individually, and they are focusing on the inner change and the restoration program for each inmate in the prisons too. Right now, it's about 350 inmates are housed in these Somang prisons too. Let me give you one quite interesting programs. In these institutions, the correctional staffs, including wardens and deputies and inmates, they are eating together in one cafeteria. I don't know any other U.S. institutions are doing the same thing. They're eating same food, they talk, sit down together. And another interesting program is they called the brothers. They called each other the brothers, rather than to call by the name, the numbers or something like that. So that's one of the examples that how this program goes in particular prisons. And since both of us were researchers, we are working on the papers to publish. That will be come out, I don't know, but sooner or later. And then also this data, it is the first time that we share from the publics too. And then so we are looking for the long-term effectiveness of these church-based private prisons. And last summer we visited together, and then during the afternoons programs where there's a lot of concerts is going on, the single word we hear a lot, amen, or the hallelujah from the inmates. That's how they're juvenated. Thank you.
Hallelujah. Thank you all so much. So the reason that we've abused our speakers so badly and only given them 4 minutes each, is so that we would have time for questions. And we have just a little bit of time for questions. Be merciful in your questions, be brief, so that other people can ask a question. Try not to make speeches, ask a real question. If it's to a specific person, please let us know who that person is. Yes, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Please push your button so we can all hear you.
Thank you for inviting everyone here, and I'm glad to be here too. And I want to say this, coming home from prison is not the end of imprisonment. When people come back from prison, they are going to face parole, hardship, housing, treatment, job, because of the fingerprint, because of the crime. You may not
get that job. 28 years ago, I came back from prison. I did time in prison, and I went straight to the church that I found when I was in prison. And that church is a Church of Gethsemane, a Presbyterian church in Brooklyn. The church gave me the opportunity to be who I am today. Since I came back from prison, I've been with that church, and I'm working in that church today. I went back to school. I'm a graduate of NYTS. But what I'm saying this is that we all have to do more. The churches have to do more. We have been preaching a lot in our churches. There are people in prison who need to hear more of God. They are not being reached. So we need to go inside the prison and give them the opportunity. And when they come back home, we embrace them with the love of Christ. And
Thank you.
let them, succeed.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Question? Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Chaplain Kim Iliano. I am a student of NYTS. I am also an active member. I'm an advocate and an activist for criminal justice reform. I'm a member of the CAKE campaign, which is a campaign for for alternatives to isolated confinement, and we're fighting for the HALT solitary bill as we speak right now. The question that I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, your name? You. Yes, I'm Lee. I'm sorry, Zach Lee. You said that you have volunteers that go into the prison daily and sit with our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated. What exactly, in what capacity? Like, what do they do? Are they chaplains? What? Yeah, what do the volunteers do?
Please.
Visitors are people, they have been screened carefully by the prison, and that is overviewed also by the Department of Corrections of South Korea. But they're people. They can teach guitar, they can be dentists and provide services, they can be there for religious purposes, for educational purposes, in addition to the educational programs that the prison has. But they can just come and talk with the people. But they've all been screened. They've been trained on how to be part of this community. And unlike the situation in this country where volunteers are suspect because they're going to bring in drugs or weapons, they're made to feel welcome.
I'd like to add also a couple of things that some of volunteers, they are professional singers, big names, and artists, and also magicians. So it is a variety of different programs, and then the artists, they come to those facilities and not just perform left, but spend some time with it too. And sometimes the symphony, they visited, a choir team visited it, and then the church pastors. So diverse background from you can think about any professional in the society. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think all of our faiths have the principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I think if we can create that atmosphere in prisons or hopefully we abolish prisons, I'm with you. What we need is to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of everybody. Another question. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Charles Atkins, Chaplain Supervisor, New Jersey Department of Corrections. Thank you all for this. This is wonderful. I just have a question about, it was talked about a couple of times in terms of policy and how we get policy through and how we deal with victims. I myself am a victim of a crime, grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and I was on the board that helped stop the death penalty in New Jersey. And one of the things we had to deal with was victims. And Dr. Fritzen, you dealt with that a little bit in terms of restorative justice work. I mean, how can we educate people, citizens, in public policy on what victims really are looking for, what victims really need for healing? Because too often politicians use victimization as a call for fearful policies.
are very correct in your observation. And I think that we miss a really important point that victims are not healed by punishments. Victim needs answers. And I think the best policy is to let victims speak and request these answers. And it's our responsibility to create the places where they can get the answers or get to say their frustration or hatred or whatever, because that's also part of a healing process.
I want to add to that. There is no place for victims to witness growth in a person as well, even if it's folks are being reviewed by parole boards or anything. Victims just send in a letter, but they don't get in return anything that a person may have done, you know, to grow in a process which will make them feel like, okay, or learn that, you know, there is some rehabilitation process that has happened.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles Thornton, and first I want to thank Hans and Charlie and the other chaplain for, you know, putting this together. I'm a member of International Queer, and I'm also a formerly incarcerated returning citizen. This has been very interesting today. I was here last year as well, but I really enjoying what I'm hearing a lot better today. One of the things that I want to inject into this, and it's somewhat not a question, but I guess more of something I would think it would help for us to do. Having spent a decade in prison, and I went in prison when I was 19, came out when I was 29. I've been home now 28 years. I've worked for the last 3 mayors, been appointed in the District of Columbia by the last 3 mayors, and today I inspect federal prisons. I go into federal prisons and inspect them. One of the things from being incarcerated I find is that there's a huge number of individuals who are, you know, Muslims, Moors, that sort of, you know, faith. And it would be great to specifically reach out to, you know, to Muslims and get them a part of this, to other faiths and get them a part of this. And the last thing, the most encouraging thing I've heard since I've been here today is what the brother up front just said. And it reminded me back to you know, Eddie Ellis, when we started talking about, you know, many years ago, when we began to talk about, you know, people. We're people. You know, I personally branded the term returning citizen in the district. And if you check it out, you will see that it was legislation that was put in through the office that I ran that changed that name in the district. But it really started with Eddie Ellis, beginning, because words have matters. Words, it matters a lot. So this has been great. You know, I messed with my friend here a lot. I told her it'll be the same like last year, but it's not. It's been great, and I'm glad I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for lifting up Muslims. My background actually is in refugee and immigration issues, and I was a refugee officer in West Africa. And I used to bring copies of the Holy Quran and give them to Muslim refugees, because most of the faith-based organizations in refugee camps, and I think in prisons as well, were Christian. And it's nice if you want to teach the Muslims the Bible, but it would be even nicer if you let the Muslims study their own book, study the Quran. So thank you very much. And I think we do need multi-faith organizations in prisons, in refugee camps, and everywhere. And this is not the end. This is actually the beginning, but this is the end of our time here in this room. So we can take the conversations and keep these conversations going, get to meet people, exchange cards, and we'll do this again. Thank you all. Thank to all of our speakers. And we will have another session, probably a bit more faith-based, at the Church Center of the UN, right across First Avenue, from 3 to 4:30. So.
We like refreshments, I understand.
Yeah, refreshments. So there's something to drink and eat over there. So it's even better than here. You can't do that here. So I look forward to seeing you across the street.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did it well.